Dormammu felt like a law given a mouth, a law that had learned to hunger. He had been a son of wrath before names were polished into myth, a conflation of faulting ember and dimension spawn. And the dark dimension was the grammar he used to write himself into being. Trigon was older in a different register, not a law but a wound, an enormous moral wound that had widened to swallow meanings, a demonic telos whose appetite was not merely for territory, but for the moral content of things. Belief, sin, guilt, hope, where Dormammu commanded structure rules of energy, ritual. Transmutation Trigon incubated corruption, the slow arithmetic of entropy that converts will into nourishment. The first chapter of this collision is not a map of where blows will land but an excavation of why they might land the way they do. For centuries Dormammu had imposed mathematics on chaos. His spells were like proofs that bent existence to an irrefutable conclusion. He built bastions across the multiverse by turning probabilities into inevitabilities, by making the dark dimension not only a place but an axiom. Any being who entered his realm would find that reality itself obeyed his fewer than infinite decrees. Dormammu's victories read like theorems, Trigon's victories read like conversions. He did not rewrite equations so much as eat the symbol set until the calculus of a world collapsed into simple devotion to him. Whole civilizations turned, not because they were rationally persuaded, but because their grievances and secret transgressions swelled into an internal mechanism that fed Trigon. Suffering turned into leverage, and leverage into dominion. When agents of reason tried to oppose him, they found that their concepts justice, mercy were not abstract shields, but metabolic substrates for demonic growth. The philosophical cleft between them, then, is essential. Dormammu is force as law, Trigon is force as meaning. Dormammu's armory holds incantations that can unmake mountains, fold time, and isolate minds from causality. Trigon's arsenal is the slow, patient conversion of identity into fuel. Doubt sown in a soldier becomes a city. A child's guilt becomes a fleet. Which is stronger in the end? That is the dialectic the cosmos will test. In quieter hours, Dormammu considered the problem as logicians consider paradox. If one could make an ultimate ontology, could one prevent corruption by trapping it within? The axioms, his experiments were ruthless, but elegant. He constructed prisons of pure law, turning chaotic entities into theorems that proved their own impotence. Trigon answered with patience. He would not merely attack those prisons. He would seed them with questions and secrets until the very idea of imprisonment softened. He turned confession into contagion. He taught the trapped how to feel shame, and that shame opened doors. The stage is set in the liminal spaces where their metaphysics overlap, crossroads, ruined sanctuaries, the thin places where belief and rule touch. A prophet on a forgotten world dreams of a son that speaks in color and a father who dines on remorse. A circle of mystics in another reality trace sigils drawn from the faulting grammar and sense for the first time the ticklish absence where meaning used to be. The cosmos begins to rearrange itself in response to two antagonistic logics. This is not simply a prelude of thunder, but a moral argument embodied. Dormammu's strategy will be to limit the battlefield to formal constraints, to translate Trigon's appetite into manipulable energy. He will attempt to make Trigon legible, a problem to be solved, to be proven inconsistent, and therefore removable. Trigon will not allow translation. He abides by a different hermeneutic. Meaning is not something to be stripped and examined under a glass, but something to be consumed and remade. He will try to make Dormammu feel the fundamental misstep for a being used to systems. To feel is for Dormammu to lose the cool clarity of law. Feeling introduces variables that cannot be reduced to ritual. The forthcoming war is therefore also a disputation about ontology. Does power that mathematizes existence win because it reduces possibilities, or does power that sacralizes suffering win because it transfigures possibility into appetite? Prophecies in both realms begin arriving like silt. Dormammu orders the translation of Trigon's corruption into combinatorial magic, creating sigils meant to cannibalize the demonic grammar. Trigon, meanwhile, infects ambassadorships, converts champions by giving them back to themselves as instruments of ruin. Around them smaller gods look for vantage, mortals brace and break. and the very fabric of causality tightens into a crucible where thought and hunger will be tested against one another. The philosophical debate is no longer abstract when cities fall. Is dominion justified because it obeys an internal logic that preserves predictability, or because it makes the world answerable to a single appetite that gives every act existential weight? Dormammu answers, order yields survivability, structure conserves being. Trigon answers, meaning yields conversion, appetite multiplies being into itself. We are left to wonder whether a universe that survives as an orderly machine is preferable to one that survives because it has been remade into a sacrificial economy. That question will not be resolved by theory alone. It will be resolved in flame and in the slow, intimate work of corruption. The signs are clear. The dark dimension thickens around its edges as Dormammu prepares proofs of annihilation. Trigon's shadows reach like fingers into sanctuaries of shame. When they finally meet, it will be more than combat. It will be a verdict rendered by the cosmos itself about what counts as enduring power. The battle opens not with an explosion, but with a silence that carries meaning, as if the universe holds its breath to hear which argument will outlast the other's vocabulary. Dormammu arrives as an orb of braided ritual and sovereign law, his presence folding local physics into clauses and subclauses. Spells bloom like paragraphs of impossible grammar, each one excising a possibility from the field of battle. Trigon answers as a cathedral of appetite, 6 eyes focus like altars, breath that tastes of lost promises, and his voice is a hymn that rearranges memory. The first clash is metaphysical. Dormammu throws a lattice of incantations designed to strip agency. He attempts to render Trigon a predicate with no subject, a demon whose predicates can be falsified. The lattice snaps into place across realities, a net of pure law intended to cage even a god. Trigon does not struggle in the way expected. Instead, he rewrites the meaning of being caged. He turns the feeling of constraint into narrative. Every binding becomes a confession, every sigil an accusation that opens old wounds in those who witness it. Soldiers fighting for Dormammu begin to recall sins they never committed. Their certainty squelches, and their magic falters. Dormammu adapts by hardening his spells, converting the psychic bleed into raw power. He hurls storms that unmake mountains, sends tendrils of faulting fire to sever the moral connective tissue of Trigon's influence. Entire star systems flake away as collateral, yet Trigon grows larger with each act of unmaking. He absorbs broken meanings like a fungus absorbing light. The battlefield becomes a paradox. Every increase in Dormammu's demonstrable power provides fresh substrate for Trigon's consumption. In a crucial sequence, Dormammu attempts a supreme maneuver. He shapes a mirror spell meant to reflect Trigon's essence back upon himself in a way that would make his hunger self-canceling. If Trigon loved himself, the argument goes, he might be paralyzed by possessing his own object. The mirror glows and the cosmos leans in. For a moment Trigon staggers, the reflective logic surprising him with the notion of self. But Trigon is not merely appetite. He is a converter of introspection into sacrifice. He receives his reflection and transmutes it. Self-love becomes self-consumption, and the mirror becomes a mouth. Dormammu's greatest subtlety is turned into fuel. The philosophical underpinning of the battle reaches its apex when Dormammu, for the first time, allows himself a kind of moral calculation. Normally alien to his nature, he chooses to save a pocket of realities by enforcing an absolutist law at the cost of annihilating others he finds inconvenient. This calculation betrays his commitment to order. Some beings must be sacrificed to preserve the theorem. Trigon exploits the choice by manifesting the suffering he creates into visible deities of guilt that march into Dormammu's heart like tiny hammers. It is not merely pain that Trigon uses, but moral currency. Each sacrifice Dormammu rationalizes augments Trigon's dominion, because it converts Dormammu's order into narrative of betrayal. In the penultimate moment, the two giants collide in a cessation of speech. Dormammu attempts to bind Trigon's pattern into a closed system, chanting a closure that would mathematically prove the demon's impotence. Trigon's counter is not a spell, but a story, with a voice that tastes like old mothers and broken promises. He whispers histories into the fissures Dormammu's magic mist. Those histories are not neutral. They are condemnations that the dark dimension, for all its precision, cannot quantify. The histories produce ministers of doubt who turn Dormammu's enforcers inward, until they become small, fragile things. Dormammu unleashes a final cataclysmic proof of collapse of probabilities. That should have resolved the war in his favor, but the collapse is, perversely, a feast. Trigon receives the cataclysm as a sacrament, consumes its certainties, and becomes not only larger but qualitatively different, no longer just a corrupter, but a rainmaker of meaning whose dominion includes the very grammar of magic. The winner emerges not because one struck harder, but because Trigon turned Dormammu's methods into the meal that nourished him. He converted law into liturgy, austerity into devotion. When the dust settles, the cosmos is quieter not because order remains, but because meaning has been centralized into a single, terrible axis of appetite. Trigon stands amid the ruins, not merely undefeated, but transfigured by what he has consumed, and the universe, altered at its semantic core, acknowledges a new verdict. Power that can subsume meaning will outlast even power that rearranges reality, because meaning, once centralized, becomes the engine that fuels perpetuity.